Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing.
Hey there, everybody. Today I have one of my favorite people on, and she's been here with me before, Michelle Thompson. And we've been talking about this interview actually for literally months and months and months, because we are living in wild times, y'all. We are living in wild times. And Michelle is somebody who's really part of the solution. Michelle Thompson, JD and PhD, talk about a bunch of alphabets at the end of her name, is the CEO, another bunch of alphabets, of Resistant Vision Coaching and Consulting. She helps women lawyers who work extreme hours to provide their prowess, build sustainable careers, and earn promotions and raises. Her approach is based on the belief that if you never set boundaries for yourself, you will always be overworking, stuck on the hamster wheel of producing more results, and losing sleep because you're always worried about clients, jobs, or the next deadline. Never mind tenure or making partner, and therefore not enjoying your life and building the community and connection you seek. With almost 3 decades in law and academia and over 5 years of experience as a professional coach, Michelle helps her clients achieve professional sanity with a variety of embodied techniques that combine left and right brain strategies, from emotional freedom technique, tapping, to strategic planning. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you, Jen. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I am so excited to have you here. And I hope that, y'all who are listening can really hear just in the description that Michelle has in the bio about, it's not just lawyers who do this stuff. Pretty much so many of us can get ourselves caught in this endless cycle of giving and giving and giving and overworking and not setting boundaries for self-care. And so I'm sure that you have so much to say. But the reason that I really wanted to bring you on was to talk about the idea of what is resistant vision and how is resistant vision part of the solution in a world that has kind of gone off the rails. But before we go into all of that, I always love to start the conversation by talking about, where did it all begin for you? What was it like being a kid? What was it like being a sensitive kid? And how did being an empath manifest for you? And I will just also say that I know in your case, you did not necessarily recognize yourself as an empath until much, much later. So I'm going to give it to you.
Okay, so true. It's fascinating. A good question. It's oh, wow, that organizes my life in a very different lens. And I feel like your question just did just that. I was the one who adults would talk to me. I'd burst into tears. I was painfully shy. I didn't like to talk. I didn't like to talk to people. There's this one picture of me. I think I must have been maybe 3 or 4. And it looks like someone's trying to talk to me. And you could just see the abject terror on my face that. I was crazy sensitive. My parents were always telling me, stop crying. Right. Mm-hmm. That was what I heard. So the reason why I'm a musician is because I was so shy. So my mom's like, okay, if you're shy, you're going to play the piano in front of people. Okay. I mean, which turns out that worked out okay. But that was her solution to that. You're slouching, ballet, off you go. Choir, good. That gets you in front of people, right? And so that was always the solution to...
Which is also probably good for slouching, too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
You're going to stand up and sing.
Exactly. Lucky for her, I like these things. Otherwise, that would have been a mess. I was sent to the University of Chicago Lab School. It's a private school, a high quality private school on the south side of Chicago, right? So very, is left brain the analytical side, very, very, very I mean, right brain.
Yeah,
because
left brain is analytical, right brain is because it's like the opposite of
Exactly.
kind of the way we think of things. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So yes, I was a musician. I danced. That's the right brain part of me. But there's also this really heavy left brain thing happening too.
Hence the lawyer and the academic.
Exactly. So, well, but here's the thing, right? When you're the daughter of immigrants, there's not a lot. There's not a lot of it just acts funny. Like my son's father is from the Philippines, and I talked to other people who come from immigrant families, and it really is so much the same thing. Like there are only a few choices for career. And so my mom's like, you can become a doctor, you can become an accountant, or you can become a lawyer. And I'm like, well, don't like the sciences. I'm not going to do accounting. That sounds boring. I'll become a lawyer. So from the time I was 12, I had decided I'm a lawyer. That's what I'm doing. And I did it. I was very focused, determined about how to do it. So I actually ended up practicing law. I practiced law for 7 years. I did it 2 years with an organization that provided all manner of services to people with AIDS. And this was in the early 90s, right? So it was, and there's still the stigma, but the stigma was way crazier, like way off the charts then. It is really funny looking at, I saw a newspaper photo of people who were afraid of catching HIV and they were in masks. Right. And that the people that you're looking at in the picture today are like, I don't want to wear a mask. Right. You know it. Right. You know it. Okay.
Oh,
that was
irony.
Those were the days.
Those were the days.
Those were the days. So I did that. I bargained at the collective bargaining table, and it's so funny. I remember I could easily tell when union members were gonna come for me, if you know what I mean. Like when they were gonna start attacking me. I would never have considered myself intuitive or empathic, but I knew it's like, oh, this is gonna be a bad day, right? Like, I knew it. I could always knew it, but I never recognized it as such. It's just like, oh, here we go again. I'm getting picked on. Mind you, I was often bullied, so I probably, I had
that radar,
right? I know when people were going to do that, but I think there's something. But there are people who throw away the radar and keep going, and mine didn't go away. So I'm practicing law. I actually wanted to become a mom, and I'm like, I don't understand how I'm going to have a baby. I'm going to be driving back and forth to Baltimore.
And where were you living at the time when you were?
I was living in DC. So
you were living in DC.
I was living in DC, right? And I wanted to live in DC because the schools would have been better than in Baltimore, although it would have been cheaper in Baltimore, right? And I'm like, this is not sustainable. This is not sustainable for a young person, right? And I met my spouse at the time, and she said, "Hey, why don't you could go get a doctorate?" And I'm like, that wasn't on my list of things to do, but why not? Let's give it a whirl, right? And that's when I started my work on the descendants of runaway slave communities in Jamaica called Maroons. Yeah, that's where, that started long before. My parents are both Jamaican immigrants, and my mom's side, her mother was a descendant of Maroons. And so I was all in. I was all in on the
So
Maroon
before we
project.
go any further, I would really love for the people who don't know anything about the Maroons, give us the
thumbnail sketch.
The thumbnail sketch, the first grader primer on Maroons.
So people, it's funny, in the United States, I think it still happens, right? We still teach slavery from the perspective but they liked it. No. No. There's always where there's slavery, there's always resistance, right? Especially if you believe in duality, right? Like you can, you're not going to have one without the other, right? Really.
Right. Yeah. It's like resistance is the counterbalance to enslaving an entire population of people.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just want to make that clear, right? And what it's easy to deny when you see resistance, because sometimes you're not clear. You don't know that that's what you're looking at, right?
Yes.
But that aside, this was obvious. So throughout the Americas, you had people of African heritage who would run away from plantations. They would behave differently depending on where they were, right? So in the U.S. South, I'm correct, many of those who were enslaved, who ran away, would often join indigenous communities. That's why there are lots of Black people have Cherokee heritage. The Spanish were the first that was the first empire to have taken the Caribbean. And that's how the Spanish actually paved the way to South America, right? Because they could stop there and then they could keep going to Mexico and places further south. The Spanish didn't, like, once they found the silver mines and other mines in South America, they just kind of let the Caribbean kind of falter. I mean, there were settlers there, right? Mm-hmm. And then there were the Taino, the indigenous population there, but they didn't do a lot with it. And the British and the Dutch, eventually the French, they saw an opportunity and they're like, ooh, for me? So 1655. So this is where actually, so everyone knows about the pirates of the Caribbean. This is the context in which you get the pirates that enter. In 1655, the crown allowed pirates to come and declare war on Spain and actually fight for Caribbean islands. Jamaica was the biggest prize that they won. That's why there were pirates. They were there to pull Spanish possessions into the British Empire. So they won Jamaica. But there were the enslaved people that the Spanish had brought there already. And so when they saw that the British were coming, they were like, deuces, we're out. they ran. So in all of the lovely tourist commercials about Jamaica, you see the lovely beaches, but Jamaica also is home to mountains, right? On the east side, there's the Blue Mountain Range. That's where the really amazing coffee comes from. On the west side are the Cockpit Mountains, and they're called that because of they're made of lime, and because of the rain, they create these huge indentations in the landscape. But this is where the enslaved Africans ran, and they declared war on the British for almost 100 years. Those are the initial maroon communities. Mm-hmm. They negotiated a treaty with the British in 1738 or 1739, depending on what part of the island, where they would be kept from slavery, where they would have the treaty set 1,500 acres of land. The Maroons say it was a lot more than that, but okay, whatever. So 1,500 acres of land. They would be responsible for returning runaway slave communities and defending Jamaica from their enemies. Those are pretty much the terms of the treaty. Mm-hmm. And that's how you have these permanent maroon communities in the middle of Jamaica.
Where does the word maroon come from? Do you know? Like,
it's often said it comes from the Spanish word cimarrones, which actually I think translates into wild hogs. Which, yeah, well, par for the course.
Right. Yeah. I just sort of thought about like being down in on this Mexican, sort of America, like sort of areas, like right down on the border, and sort of the idea of the javelinas that just run wild everywhere. So, people. I was wondering if it had to do with like the idea of being marooned, and kind of these abandoned populations or something.
Not at all.
It's much more nefarious than that.
Of course, it has to be. Yeah. That's how you come to marooned populations.
Yeah, and so these are people who had a certain amount, or it sounds like had quite a bit of autonomy in contrast to a lot of other enslaved folks and people who had sort of emancipated themselves.
Absolutely. And I think, when you have maroon communities in Jamaica, you have them in Guyana, which is what is now British Guyana. You have them in Haiti. Apparently they played a huge role in the Haitian Revolution. And Cuba had huge communities of them, and also Brazil. But what you'll notice about the places I've lived is that the topography allowed them to hide and build communities. Like that's the nature of the topography of where they are. That helped a lot.
Well, and what's so fascinating as you're saying this is just realizing like how much our relationship to land impacts our capacity for thriving communities versus suffering communities.
Exactly.
And safety.
Exactly.
And just thinking about like, what does I don't know, like it would be a really interesting thing to just look at populations in regards to like the landscape and how that affects people's autonomy and people's freedom and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a meaningful statistic that white men own 80% of the land, right? Because what does that mean for the autonomy of everyone else? Yeah. Well, and I think you and I might have been having this conversation about, and I know I've had this conversation about just sort of like
women in general tend to make really different choices about how they use their resources than
Absolutely.
males do.
Absolutely.
And that women tend to be thinking much more in terms of philanthropy and altruism and care.
Or just, God forbid you just grow crops to feed people.
Right.
Let's get crazy. Right?
Let's get crazy. Let's actually feed people. You discovered, going back to you're in graduate school and you discover this passion project that is just like lights your heart on fire. And in many ways is really the piece that is kind of like the through line for your life of recognizing what does it mean to stand up against tyranny? What does it mean to stand up against oppression? And as our community likes to say, empire. And what does it mean to be part of the resistant vision?
So I'll start with my legal career was all based on get the guys, right? I mean, but I never was part of ACT UP, but still want to be, right? Right. Like that's always fueled what I did. The labor movement. I can't think of a movement that when it's really functioning as it should, that's a place where you can topple empire in very particular ways. The history of the Maroons is it's very connected to that as well, right? The name Resistant Vision came to me. I mean, part of it was channeled, but I don't think I could have channeled it without deep research into these communities. So it was a couple years after I finished my dissertation, and I was going back and revising an article. And I think the book title came about before I realized it could be a business name, right? And I realized that, so I don't write about the Maroon Wars. I think there's enough on that I had nothing to contribute to. Really, I'm like, I got nothing more to say about that. But, right? So emancipation happened in the British Empire 30 years before it happened in the United States. So around 1835, 1832, you see the emancipation of the enslaved in England. And at that point, Jamaica is like, we need labor, right? Because people are leaving plantations. They're like, we're done. Thank you. It's been real. So they're trying to figure out how to conscript Black labor. And no one's off the table. So although there's this treaty with Jamaica's Maroon communities, the legislature's like, yeah, let's just abolish the treaty. We'll just pass a law and we'll abolish the treaty.
I've never seen anything like that.
I can't imagine. What would give that crazy idea?
Laws, repealing rights of people.
Yeah, well, I know. So fresh. So they just passed this law. And what is fascinating is, I mean, it's not surprising, but what's fascinating is the Maroons are like, no, we're not doing this, right? And they were going to do it each of you could have 2 acres of land, and they have this whole scheme that they're going to do. And they're like, yeah, no. And they literally stay in the same place in the exact same way that they had for 100 years before that. And every single interaction you see, I don't think that's overstated. Every single interaction you see between the Jamaican government and the Maroons for the rest of the 19th century is a contest between the Maroons trying to make the treaty the way that they understood it. And they thought they were going to be getting 15,000 acres of land, not 1,500 acres, right? And on the one hand, so you have one party who's like, oh, no, no. Not only are you not going to get rid of the treaty that easily, we want what you really promised us. And on the other hand, you have a Jamaican government who's trying to pull land from them so that they will join the labor force. Neither side is game for war, but you see how resistance is used by the Maroon population to actually expand their land holdings. And they're modestly successful in doing it, but they do expand their land holdings in the 19th century. And what was clear to me is that they had a vision, right? 15,000 acres. And their resistance very much served that vision.
So they really held. So I'm hearing in this that there is an energetic aspect of the resistance that was going on for the Maroons. in that they had a vision. They had a clear sense of like, what was the goalpost? What was the thing that they knew they wanted? And regardless of the shenanigans and the gaslighting that was going on with a government that was probably trying to pull eminent domain, that the Maroons held the vision. And so it's really, which is really magical. I mean, this is like law of attraction stuff, where it's like you are holding the vision of what matters.
Exactly. Right.
So
And I think
I'm really hearing the aspect of within this vision, within like the fact that you are not just talking about resistance coaching. You're talking about resistant vision.
I'm talking about vision and all of your actions. To create a vision of a society that we really want, the actions will be resistant because you're resisting, it's not the noise that's laid out for us, but it's serving a vision, right? I get very frustrated with the abortion debates because it's small. It's small, right? Don't listen to this and think she doesn't back abortion. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying abortion is one of many components of reproductive autonomy. I'm interested in reproductive autonomy.
Yes.
That's what I'm interested in, right?
Yes.
I'm interested in how women get to decide with whom and when they get to have children, right? And that has implications, right? For many BIPOC women, they're actually what the state will do is force them not to have children because they're not cute white babies, right? Like Amy, the Supreme Court Justice, I don't even like her name.
Conan Bryant.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's not quite it, but like whatever her name is.
Something like that.
Amy, right? I mean, she's upset because there are not enough white children to adopt, right? And if you look at it, I know, poor thing.
Too bad, so sad.
Right? But
Coney Bryant, I think it is.
That's something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. Obviously, we are so impressed by this woman. We know
that we don't
name.
even remember her name, right? Exactly. I know it's Amy. Perfect.
Amy, something.
But you see, right? That has real implications for BIPOC women and reproductive autonomy, right? On the one hand, you have a state that's telling us we don't want your children, and on the other hand, we compel you to have children, right? You cannot focus only on abortion to actually make sense of that makes sense of that. So that the debate, and I understand why it gets framed that way, but the debate can't be framed in such a small way because it loses the vision. The vision really is about women having full lives. We don't want to talk about that. I don't really understand why, but that's what's at stake. That's actually what's at stake. And so everything we do should be supporting a vision of women living their full lives as full human beings. That's resistant vision. That's resistant vision.
Well, and, going into sort of tying this back into the whole empath component, so many empaths are feeling the impact of all of the ways that the systemic choices we've been making for a couple hundred years at the very least now, and really for thousands of years. But in terms of like the industrial age and the impact of our choices, like I believe that empire and patriarchy had profound impact on us, but did not necessarily have the cataclysmic impact that it is having now. Because we just didn't have the technology to do the harm that we're doing these days. And as empaths, I think that so many of us can feel the rumble under our feet and can feel sort of the sense of there is something wrong with what is going on. But as we all know, or as I imagine most of us who are listening to this are aware of, the fundamental laws of attraction are, where you focus your attention is what grows. And the thing about so much of the, the liberal agenda is sadly focused on what we do not want as opposed to what we want. And I think that, the beauty of resistant vision is that it is about what we want and not what we don't want.
Exactly. I mean, it was a very subtle reframing. To talk about abortion, it's a very, very subtle reframing.
Very subtle reframing.
But it isn't on don't take away my rights. It is about treat me as a full autonomous being.
Right, right. And look at the holistic component of it, because I mean, this is a can of worms that we could go and like a rabbit hole we could go down, because there are so many different aspects of it. And just like the incredible irony of it is like, you're not allowed to terminate a pregnancy, but God forbid we give you food stamps or any kind of resources or anything to look at. I mean, it's sort of like as soon as the fetus is out of your body, they cease to have any, like there's no support.
But we need to put as much attention and energy in that as we do and healthcare as we do abortion.
Right. And the right to choose. Exactly. Right. Because, and the thing is, and what I really think this is an important thing. The right to choose is as much about the right to choose to carry a pregnancy to term as it is to decide not to carry a pregnancy to term. Exactly. And having the resources to choose how are you going to live your life.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
So as a highly sensitive empathic person, and I know, knowing you to the extent that I know you, I know that, like climate change is one of the things that really concerns you, and that that you are very aware of, as well as, just a lot of other sort of systemic things that are kind of like, really, you're going to do that. So I'd love to talk about what it means to be the experience of an empath feeling, well, and I'm just thinking there's another thing, which is, how did you, like, what was it? When did, what was it that made you go, oh, I'm an empath? But let's hold off on that question and talk about instead what it's like or was like to be experiencing, like, you've got this, you've got a PhD, your specialty is in the maroon population and examining indigenous and and enslaved. Actually, would you say indigenous within the maroon population is?
Well, actually, what's interesting, true story about jerk pork. Jerk pork pirates and maroons. We're going to combine it all together, right? One of Jamaica's greatest culinary contributions to the world is jerk seasoning.
Yeah,
and it's created in a time where you don't have refrigeration, right? So what would happen is that there's a place called Boston, Jamaica, lest you doubt if the British were there. And at this port in Boston, pirates would pull up. And so when the enslaved ran up into Jamaica's mountainous areas, in this case, it was the Blue Mountains, there were indigenous people there. It wasn't like empty, right? So you have these communities merging together, and the African folk actually understood the topography and understood what the greenery offered, right? They probably had some understanding. They probably had some understanding of allspice. It's very Jamaican, right? But they probably had some working understanding of many of the spices that were there. Anyhow, they between the indigenous and African populations, they would kill wild boars, and then they would and they have this whole, if you go to Boston, you can still see it done, right? They have a whole grill, they call it a patta, P-A-T-T-A, that they grill the meats on, that's coated by allspice and black pepper and other things that I don't know all of them. This is what jerk pork was. These communities would sell it to pirates who came into port, and they could have that pork forever because it was dried out in a way that they could use it. It tasted far better than jerky, of course.
Right? Of course. Well, and isn't it interesting that jerky is called jerky? But I also have a more benign idea about why the maroons are called maroons. If what they were feeding everybody was wild boar, and they became known for selling wild boar to all kinds of other populations, I don't know. Like, that to me is like, oh, well, then maybe because, just sort of like they conflated the product with the people.
That's possible. It would be an interesting
etymology. I find etymology. Yeah. I mean, I find etymology of words, and particularly food words, so fascinating. Yeah. Like Hoppin' John,
Yes. Yeah. That has,
which my understanding is starts from pois pigeon, which is pigeon peas.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But yeah, that's how did I get here? But that's what did you ask me?
We were talking about like the impact of being sensitive And before really grabbing or understanding the full magnitude of what resistant vision is, what it feels like and felt like as an empath to be sort of aware of all of the systemic breakdown and the things that are going wrong.
Yeah, I think there was another question too, but whatever.
The other question was one I've got a pin in, which has to do with when did you realize you were an empath?
Okay, I don't remember how I got to jerk meats, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I was following you. It made total sense to me.
But now you know. But
we know. Yeah,
I suspect.
Oh, I know how we got there. I used the question, or actually, I used the word indigenous as well as
right. Okay, yeah, yes.
And and so then you were talking about sort of the integration or the cross-pollination of enslaved and indigenous. Yes, yes. Okay, that's how we got there. Okay. People are like, yes, people. The audience is like, you guys, we were following you. We know where you were coming from. Thanks for coming back. Yeah.
I suspect that I was always empathic, right? The weepy kid, the really hardcore pull to do social justice work as a lawyer. And then like of all the topics that one could look at historically, I mean, granted, there's a family line, but this is like kind of next level, right?
Well, and it is really, I mean, talk about niched. Like it is an incredibly niched, like, doctoral topic. Yeah.
Exactly. I don't step into, I think it's not until I'm owning a business and actually being in circles with people who talked about empathic that I didn't embrace it immediately. I don't know why, but it becomes.
I knew you at a point where you were kind of like, y'all are this, but I'm not so sure that I'm that. And
right.
I was like, sure, Michelle.
Have it your way.
Yeah.
But I do think people, actually, this is what it was. People started referring to me as being really intuitive. And I'm like, what? Right?
Yeah.
The left brain one, like, I don't think so. But as that started happening, I would get pangs of premonition. I don't remember what all of them were. I mean, one of them was I was dreaming and I was in a choir and there was a conductor that was there for a year. And then I had a dream that conductor was saying, I'm leaving. The old conductor's coming back. And that morning, that's exactly what happened. I'm like, okay, that was weird. Right? I'm like, all right. So like at that point when I'm starting to get pangs of like what happened in the future, I'm like, there must be something to this, right? Because I couldn't have made that up if I tried. I just could, like, if I wanted to do data collection, there's your data, right?
There's your data.
And that's when I had to start to kind of say, oh, okay, well, clearly I have a superpower. I mean, and it's intuitive, but I think many empathics are intuitive, right?
Yes, and my personal explanation of this is that intuition is that calm knowing of something where we just, we know something, but we know about it as something outside of ourselves. Whereas when we are, and in my experience, the paranormal or, extrasensory perception, whether it's, psychic, intuitive, empath, medium, even channel, all of these are people who have a capacity, or beings that have a capacity to be open to receiving more than the ordinary eye can see, the ordinary ear can hear, that we are receptive to picking up a lot more information. My distinction, and what I've really come to see, is that the difference between empath and other aspects of this, or empathic, but empathic is more like the idea. Empathic is more like, empathic is funny because I see it as having almost like it's like there and there. It has two meanings. You've got empathic in the sense of the people have a capacity for empathy. And then you've got empathic in the sense of a definition of people who are empaths. So I'm going to just say for right now, empathic in the sense of people who are empaths. What I've noticed is that when somebody is in their empathic feels, what happens is they filter all the information through their own lens, through their own experience. And so if an empath if a psychic or an intuitive walks into a room where there's been sort of a conflict or something, they may walk in and be like, why do I feel so angry and sad? or no, I mean, sorry. Why? Oh my, no, sorry. That's the psychic walks into the room
Right.
and goes, wow, there's so much sadness and anger in this room. I can
Right.
really feel it. The empath walks into the room and goes, oh my God, I've just been, I'm suddenly feeling so incredibly sad and angry. Why do I feel so sad and angry? And that's sort of, at least from my perspective, that's the distinction. However, most empaths in my experience also have, intuition and intuitive and psychic abilities, but the empath quality of being flooded by it and picking it, feeling it, and, is often will sort of override that discernment because it is such a deeply felt experience.
And I have a funny feeling that once I could actually tell that I had an intuitive sense, I could actually lean into, and I'm feeling other people's feels.
Right. Well, and, you and I have had a couple times where we've gotten together and you've been like, I'm feeling this, this, and this. And we start doing some work around it and kind of like, tapping it out. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, this isn't even mine. This isn't even mine. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, and when you're going through really hard things in life, like you have to get really, really clear about, oh, this isn't mine. Okay, that's over there. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Right. I mean, we've got enough to deal with our own stuff without basically trying to do the emotional heavy lifting and processing for absolutely everybody else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think part of it is that I was always a news junkie. I mean, it's like really until probably until Trump, I was a news junkie, right? Mm-hmm. Election night, I'd be up, I'd be watching all the, returns. And I think that really interfered with my ability to actually connect with this part of myself. Oh, it keeps you in fight or flight all the time, right? And if you are busy going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, the world's falling apart. Oh my God, like you're not getting any messages. Right.
You're distracted you're just watching the dumpster fire and
exactly. And
I
think part of it is, part of why I can latch into the fear so well is actually that I'm an empath, but I don't have enough space to navigate that.
Right. Well, and I mean, culturally, it's so interesting just thinking about the phenomenon of, I really do believe that because the emotional intensity on the planet has been heating up and just the sense of peril and the existential threat to humanity has literally been heating up, that there are so many people who may have been able to compartmentalize, or when things were less stressful, it was like a rain barrel effect. They were not overwhelmed by their empathic nature to the extent that they are now. Mm-hmm. But keeping people afraid, keeping people engaged in the fear, keeping people hooked into this mass epidemic of fear is one of the most effective ways to keep people basically barefoot and pregnant and disempowered.
Actually, and it's interesting. I was thinking like it has real because I'm serving lawyers, right? And that if you're keeping lawyers completely terrified about billables, if you're keeping them terrified about your boss hates you, your clients hate you, if you don't do this and that, and right? It keeps you from really tapping into all different versions of your intelligence and your knowledge and all of your different versions of knowing, right? That has real implications.
Well, and you were saying before we got on about lack of sleep. A sixth grader is going to perform at a fourth grader capacity with lack of sleep.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And you'll get you'll have the same horrible results no matter what you're doing. Right.
Right.
I mean, it's horrific to think we have doctors trying to do work on us who've gotten no sleep.
Oh my God. I mean, this is just a whole other conversation, but it's like the insanity of what we put medical doctors and especially like surgeons, the people who have the most power in terms of human life of anybody. And they're working these insane residency hours where they are getting no sleep at all. And then within the lawyer population, and I think medical population, a lot of these professional populations, it's work. And then alcohol or other kinds or benzos or something becomes a means for chilling out. And I mean,
Exactly.
having known a fair number of having conversations with a fair number of lawyers, I know that, like like benzo addiction and alcoholism is it's a thing.
It's a real thing. It's an absolute thing, right? I mean, I think 26% of lawyers admit to having an alcohol problem.
26% admit,
right? Admit.
One quarter,
which
more than a quarter of the population of lawyers admit to having an alcohol problem.
I'm stunned that many admit, right?
That's pretty spectacular.
Right.
Like,
so it's
because denial is not a river in Egypt.
The show ain't, but that's a whole other show. Right, but yeah, no, it's profound, right? And it really impacts our full ability for full knowing. And it doesn't actually shift. The other thing about this is that, I mean, I think we forget that we're all operating in real oppressive systems, right? And so if the purpose of a legal system is to make sure that the owning class, right, the people who own the ability to extract from the earth, if the purpose of the legal system is to continue to support them in doing that, right, the very core of what is the cause of the climate emergency, they're going to do everything in their power to keep lawyers working to keep their ability to do that, right? And so your lack of sleep, your endless hours, your inability to build community, to connect with the communities from which you came, are all profoundly impacted because you're busy making sure that Elon Musk can continue to extract whatever it is he needs to extract from the Congo to make your Tesla. Is that what you want? Right? Is that where we're headed? Is that what we really want?
Well, and so many people go into advocacy work, whether it is, law or other forms of political action, because they see they have, like, I really believe that as a population, I mean, certainly there are people who go into corporate law and other things where their agenda is for, like, they want to make money. But I personally believe,
right.
I personally believe that there is a substantial portion of people who go into law and other kinds of advocacy because they want to make a difference in the world, and they see the systemic problem. They do have a resistant vision. They have a sense of things could be better. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it's almost like we're in this maze where we've got a couple doors with signs over them that say exit, but they're contained, the exits are contained within a system that is basically a closed system designed to keep us all engaged in productivity, engaged in capitalism, engaged in reinforcing empire. And this idea that, ownership is more important than community, that ownership, that protecting resources for the owning class is more important than any of these other things. So it's just fascinating thinking about, you've got this whole population of people who I really believe go into this field because they want to be part of the solution and they want to make a difference. But then they become indoctrinated into a system that keeps them on the hamster wheel, exhausted and scared and stressed out and constantly worrying about, like, their billables and all of that other stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so here we have, and somehow you came to the place where you were like, there's a better way.
Yeah, I have. It's been,
I mean, isn't that what resistant vision is all about? Really?
It is. And and as a resistant vision continues to develop, I created the company, and I had to let it sit and marinate for a little bit. Right. And, never one to not be studying and learning more. At some point for me, all roads lead through Rachel Rogers. We should all be millionaires. But one of her good friends is Susan Hyatt, who wrote a book called Bear. And
B-E-A-R or B-A-R-E?
And on some level, one could just call it a weight loss book. I think it actually is a lot more than that. And she talks about, she's one of the first people it's probably not the first, but the first I've read, who really talks about the role of pleasure that it's easier to do things if you are connected with the pleasure that you have in your life. It's easier to lose weight, right? Because women will eat because it's pleasurable.
Yes.
And it's the easy pleasure fix that you can get, right?
It is.
You can't tell when you're hungry, right? You're just kind of like, that was a horrible day. Oh, the French fries are amazing, right? Right? Like that's what we do. I don't mean to make light of it, right? Like things are that hard. Things are actually that hard. That's the easy, cheap fix that we have.
Well, and it's one of the few fixes that we have. It is, especially if you are, especially for a lot of women where maybe they don't have the alcoholism gene, where if they start drinking, it's gonna send them over the edge. Because I mean, certainly we also have the whole phenomenon of wine culture, for mothers and everything. But I think the thing is, food, while it is profoundly impactful in many, many ways, it's not intoxicating in the same way that a lot of other things are. So you can eat those French fries and you can still get your kid to bed on time.
Exactly.
You can still get up in the morning and do your job.
Exactly. And, knock yourself out of French fries, your thing. But here's the thing. How do we actually develop? I mean, I think this part of what's really core about the whole abortion, I did air quotes, debate, is that it really is also a discussion about female pleasure, right? Because women are pregnant because of, I don't know, pleasure. Right? Pleasure.
Hopefully.
It's not always that way, right? But but this is where the fart right's brain is, right? Y'all engage in pleasure. You should be engaging in it, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is evidence of your sinful behavior, of your wanton flesh.
See, right?
Yeah.
So, but here's the thing, and sex. I'm here for sex for pleasure. I'm here for that. Food is lovely, right? But here's the thing: we've got to develop. I think what ends up happening in patriarchal societies is that we get deprived of multiple forms of pleasure, right? This is where, when we're separated from the earth, this is a problem. You can't see, but I'm surrounded by plants. And this has become a thing of mine since my mom died, right? But when I'm working in this space, which isn't often lately for other reasons I'm not going to go into, right? I'm connected to what's green. I'm connected to the earth, and it is they're beautiful, right?
Yes.
They're beautiful. It's another form of pleasure, right? When we turn exercise into a thing to do to get skinny, we actually can't tell what's pleasurable about it. I mean, or are we doing the thing of exercise that's actually bringing us pleasure, that we actually enjoy it? I like going for a vigorous walk outside to Central Park. I love feeling the crisp air in my lungs. It's stunning to watch the greenscape change over time, right? It's pleasure. It's absolute pleasure, right? There are all of these ways, and I'm just scratching the surface, right? There's so many ways, the other day, my sister and I were on a conversation. What an amazing conversation, right? This brought me pleasure. A good book brings me pleasure, right? And when we are dissociated, both from our bodies, but from what also brings us pleasure, we're not in a position where we can actually do what needs to be done.
Right. Well, and something that I've been really thinking a lot about since the book started to come, the next book that's coming started to come through me this summer, or last, July of 2022, was that empaths have, we focus as empaths so much on our picking up on the distress, picking up on the agony, the misery, all of the problems that are going on in the world. And I sincerely believe that part of the reason why empaths are doing that is because we are supposed to be the canaries in the coal mine that are saying, y'all, there is a gas leak here and we need to do something about it before we blow ourselves to smithereens as a species. But we also have the capacity to pick up on and also to broadcast delight, pleasure, joy, wonder. And at the same time, at any given point in time, at the same time that there are all of these things that are going on the planet that is absolutely miserable, there are also people who are having sex with their beloved for the very first time and looking in the eyes of the person, like where they're like, I found you. There are people who are holding their baby in their arms for the very first time, like madly, like gratefully, like, oh my God, here you are. There are people who have just completed a project that they've been working on forever. There are people who are in their bodies dancing and moving. There are people who just won gold medals and things. There are people who are cooking the best meal possible and tasting something and going, oh my God, how did I come up with this? There are people who are standing on mountaintops and looking across these vistas and just gobsmackingly amazed at the exquisite beauty that they are surrounded by. I mean, I'm just using some examples, but like there are a million different ways to describe this. And as empaths, we are, you know, the conditioning for so many of us has been to focus on the problem instead of focus on the solution.
Right, right.
And what I'm really hearing, and you and I have been talking about what is resistant vision for quite a while, but what I'm really hearing, the nugget I'm taking out of this conversation is that resistant vision is about turning our focus, acknowledging the problem, but turning our focus to the pleasure, to the joy, and to the vision of what could be possible and what is possible, as opposed to continuing to look at the problem and engage with it in a way that just keeps us exhausted, tired, eating French fries, and, you know, drinking a box of wine.
And frankly, if we're not going to fix the climate emergency if we can't embrace pleasure, if we can't embrace delight, if we can't, because part of it is that we've sped everything up so much, right? Everything is so fast now.
Well, and to
stop the climate emergency, we actually have to slow the fuck down.
We have to slow down. We also have to be in our bodies, because if we look at our bodies as a cell in the body of this earth, if we recognize that we are part of the earth and that each one of us is an individual expression of the earth, if we are not allowed to feel our bodies and especially to engage with our bodies like we're from a place of joy, from a place of delight and a place of pleasure, it makes complete sense that we are not going to be able to engage with the greater body, which is the earth, in a way that means that we care about the earth, and also that we feel our interconnection to the earth and the impact of the choices we're making. So I'm just really seeing how our denial of pleasure is directly connected in the sense of it's also about, if we deny pleasure in our own body, then of course we're going to be dissociative from what's going on with the body of the earth.
Exactly. Yeah. I was thinking about what was that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer? I can't think of her last name, and Meryl Streep. Oh gosh,
give me a little bit more. What was the plot about?
It was about the climate. It was about an asteroid coming to hit the Earth, and everyone was denying it. Don't Look Up.
That's what it was called. Don't Look Up.
Don't
with Jonah Hill and oh my God, what a brutal movie.
Brutal but brilliant, right? I mean, not that it stopped anything, but you know, one of the, as you see this asteroid getting really close, like some of the footage is like you got to see people making love to each other. Like, what you gonna do? Like, or people having really wonderful meals with the people they love and care about. Wonderful meals
together,
right?
Yes,
like that's
what matters.
That's what actually matters.
Yeah,
that's what really, really matters. If we're not forced to figure out how to chase the next piece of coin so we can actually take care of ourselves, like that's what's possible.
Right. Well, in the building of communities and the interconnection with each other, it's like it is what is going to lead us through whatever it is that our species is going to be going through and is going through. It's like it's that interconnection. It's these kinds of rich, delicious conversations that make the difference.
Exactly. That's our way out. And it's not, no, I didn't, we shall overcome, but damn it, I'm a chat with Joe on the way. You know what I mean? Right? Like, that's, I mean, in a way, that's part of what made that's interesting. I mean, that's part of what made the civil rights movement so rich, that people built profound, close relationships with each other. Right. And it's fascinating that the powers that be will point to Martin Luther King as, moral immoral, right? Because he had affairs.
Yeah, he's a womanizer. Yeah.
Right. He was a womanizer. And I mean, isn't that, but that's what that's what Black men, Black women were deprived of, right? That was all institution of slavery, that we couldn't have pleasure. And we got targeted and lambasted because, God forbid, we actually engaged in pleasure. Look at that Jezebel, look at that whore, right? And right, that was the basis of enslaving us, because we don't know how to control our natural urges. Right.
Well, women in general don't know how to control. Women don't,
right? But I mean, and Black men get targeted in a particular way too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But so I'm not that I'm here for. I'm not like, don't walk away saying she's pro-womanizing. I didn't say that, right? But
I didn't hear that. But what I hear you saying is that there is a way in which the lens through which he was regarded in maybe like amplified that aspect of him, but also demonizing the pursuit of pleasure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But pleasure was definitely part of the civil rights movement. It had to be.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be. Otherwise, why? I mean, we know why. I mean, there is a why, but like, we don't need. We're not people who need more toil in their lives. Right? Like, no. That's not what we need. Yeah, the way out is. I feel very strongly that the way out is with pleasure, and we have to reconnect with that in many, many different ways.
In many, many different ways. So let's talk about, what does that look like on a really, really, like, how do I reclaim my pleasure?
I'm just starting to scratch the tip of the iceberg. But you know what? Sleep. We don't. Part of keeping us going all the time is that we don't sleep. Sleep feels damn good when it works well. It's like real. It's an amazing thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple. Like sleep. If running 20 miles a day is your thing, if that actually brings you pleasure, I want to back up. I think what I'm suggesting is that I think we actually need to slow down and notice what it is we really want and what we really crave.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't slow down,
we're being told we want and crave.
Exactly, right? I mean, that's the whole purpose of advertising. You want this, don't you want this? Hello, you want like that. I need a moment. I need a moment to really sit down and think about what it is that really lights my fire, right? And after my mom's passing, I noticed that I go by nurseries or plant stores and my attention's pulled, right? I don't indulge it every time, but it's important for me to notice that, right? But that's a source of pleasure for me. But you have to slow down enough to know, oh, wow, I'm being pulled to that thing. I wonder why, right? There's a woman, I've told you about her, Kim Anami, who is very, very into her thing is everything goes through the vagina, right? But there's something to that, right? What lights you up, you will have a physical reaction to that in that very profound personal place, right? With you, right? You're not going to get wet if it doesn't light you up. That's just the biology of a woman. That's the way that works, right? And but you'd have to slow down to notice.
Right. And you have to, and we have to go back. I mean, there's just so many aspects of how do we go back and retrieve the part of ourself that can even recognize we're feeling pleasure when we have been socialized to ignore, to deny, to suppress, to push down. I mean, it's interesting because I think culturally, women of color are often regarded as the Jezebels and the brazen hussies.
Mm-hmm.
White women, I mean, there's definitely the Madonna whore thing within white women as well. But I think that often white women, on the other hand, are sort of like the derogatory terms that she's a Karen. And that a lot of times white women are sort of like programmed or regarded as frigid. And so it's here we are again in the damned if you do, damned if you don't, that it's a total insult to be brazen. And it's also a complete insult and an invalidation of your role as a female if you are this dried up, frigid woman. But the bottom line is both the messages consistently do not be embodied, do not feel your pleasure, do not experience joy and delight. I actually keep on thinking about this commercial that really was like, and this is where the interface between food and pleasure and sex shows up. So back in probably the late 80s, early 90s, there was a kind of diet food called Snackwells.
I remember those, yeah.
So there was this one commercial where there was like this like from here to eternity scene on a beach with a man and a woman, and it was a white woman and a white man on a beach having sex. And the man and woman were like rolling around in the sand, which always makes me go, "Oh my God, I cannot even imagine having sex." I'm like, sand in my butt crack, no thank you. But give me a nice, soft, cozy bed anytime. Thank you.
We're here for that. Yes, exactly.
But anyway, in the commercial, there's a picnic blanket and a picnic basket and a box of Snackwells about 10 or 15 feet, maybe 20 feet away from the couple. In the image or in the commercial, the woman is making out and rolling around on the sand, and her astral body, they do a cut where they basically like do a special effect where the woman sits up from her body. So her body is still having sex, but her spirit, her attention sits up, looks over at the Snackwells, gets up, walks out of her body, goes over to the picnic table, picks up the box of Snackwells, and eats the snacks, eats the cookies while watching her body have sex. I have never, ever seen anything that demonstrates the connections between dissociation and sexuality for women, but also eating disordered, dissociation and eating, and also the sort of the thing of like you're sanctioned or allowed to have this temporary guilty pleasure with food. But of course, then, but this is diet food. So like, and that was the other message that's in it is like, well, because this is diet food, you're allowed to have this kind of pleasure.
Dissociate for this.
But you're not allowed dissociate for this, but you're allowed to have this kind of pleasure because this is an acceptable pleasure because it's low calorie and it's special diet food versus having sex. This commercial to me was like the first time I saw it, because I was already doing a lot of work around eating disorders and body image and feminism and stuff. I was just like, oh, no, you didn't.
I did. I went there.
It was amazing. But the thing was, it was so on point that I'm sure it worked as a commercial because it was doing exactly what we've been conditioned to do.
Exactly. And I think it just, and it does. I mean, it's interesting that all of this happens in a minute, right? Like that's how long commercials are. 1 minute, 30 seconds. 1
minute.
That's all they need to hit all of those alarm bells. Exactly. And we actually, I mean, I love Glennon Doyle, Glennon Doyle's Untamed because, she talks about going in the closet and like blocking out all of her stuff, like no light sense, like none of it. And just actually sitting down and like really listening to what her gut has to say. But it's going to take that level of slowing down for us to really connect with what our bodies are saying about things. Like yesterday we did that amazing EFT session. I'm like, look at that. My solar plexus is something to say, like for the first time ever, right? You know what I mean? Like but it does really take slowing down. It takes slowing down. It's going to take healing a shit ton of stuff, right? Because it's a hurt that we're that disconnected from our bodies and from what we want. It is a hurt. We're going to have to heal those hurts. And it's going to have to be slow. Easy does it. It's like
regrowing. It's almost like we as a species have this profound nerve damage where we are paralyzed and disconnected from our body. Like we are, because I really believe we are interconnected, that you and I are part of the same body. Like you're one cell, I'm another cell, but we are all part of the same body. We're all interconnected, but we have had so much nerve damage that we do not feel our connections to each other. We do not feel our connections to the earth. And then we don't feel our connections to ourselves. And meanwhile, we are being given all of these messages of like, go, 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 10x your business every single month. Like buy this course, do this thing, get this new phone, get this new piece of clothing, get these Louboutin shoes. All of these ways that we are we are encouraged to just keep pushing to the brink. And I mean, it's like, I don't know. It strikes me that in some ways, the entity or the mechanism that is thriving on, it's like almost like cancer in the sense that there is something that is living off of and thriving on this incredibly hectic pace that we are functioning at. But it is not what is sustainable for us as a species. It is not what is sustainable for the planet.
Exactly.
It's just not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. It absolutely isn't sustainable. And we can't do what we need for the planet in that energy and in that spirit. It's not doable.
Not doable.
We actually, I mean, that's what it means to decolonize. Like we can't, we'll just move at a pace faster than the destructive forces. No, no, we actually have to
slow down. Well, and that's kind of the irony. In some ways, it's sort of like in order to repair this, we cannot continue to we cannot rush into it or race into it or speed up, like try to to outrun the disaster. We actually have to downshift and we need to stop hurtling ourselves through space.
We're actually going to have to sit in the disaster too, right? Like, I mean, that we can't run from it away, or we can't run from it to get before it, right? I think there are parts of it's like, if we could just go back to, no, we're not going back to that, right?
We're not going back to that.
Fill in the blank, whatever it is, we're not going back to it, right? We actually have to sit with it. And that might seem very contrary to pleasure, right? But pleasure is the vehicle that helps us sit with what is now.
Well, and also the relationship between sitting with the authenticity, we cannot feel pleasure if we cannot feel grief. We cannot feel pleasure if we cannot feel despair. Exactly. We cannot feel pleasure if we cannot acknowledge the places where we feel fear and anxiousness.
Exactly. Duality, it's about duality, right? Like you don't get one without the other.
You don't get one without the well, and
actually, this is the challenge of white supremacy, right? Because white supremacy says white people get to feel all the pleasure, and all y'all get to feel all the horrible stuff for us. And that's not how that works.
It is not how it works.
Right?
It's not how it works.
Right?
Well, and who among the white people even are actually feeling pleasure when, when you understand that you are part of something greater than yourself and you are interconnected? I do not believe that, like Jeffrey Epstein and all of the people who were doing the horrible things that they were doing and violating these girls, that these men were actually experiencing pleasure. I don't believe that that's really pleasure.
Those were power trips. Those power trips are not about
power trips, and it's trauma.
Pleasure. Right. Exactly.
It's not about pleasure.
Exactly.
And so then from that standpoint, the other thing is the white, God, this is a whole other thing about that I just really believe is that the European annihilation that happened with the burning times and that happened with our indigenous traditions getting destroyed created such a rift of trauma within our own bodies that we have been kicking the can of trauma down the road now for hundreds, if not thousands, for over 1,000 years, where we are, and now it's like we're so dissociated, we're so disconnected that we've got these people who are expressing the trauma in the form of power over by having sex with 14-year-old girls and thinking that that's pleasure. I mean, no, that is not pleasure.
No, it's a hurt that you're acting out over and over and over.
Over and over again. Yeah, because I don't know about you.
And actually to get to the pleasure, the amount of pain, my suspicion is that the amount of pain that someone like a Jeffrey Epstein would have to face, he was completely unwilling to do.
Completely unwilling, incapable, probably.
Right. Yes, exactly. Right. Like when you're willing to take that stand and to go there, right? That's a whole lot of pain.
It's a lot of pain
that you're not willing to do not willing to dance with. I mean, that's part of the challenge of a political system, right? Like, oh, no, we're going to try to keep it so that we don't have to feel the pain. It's like, no, you don't get to, that's a get out of jail free card that you actually don't get. We're human beings. We don't get to do that.
Well, and knowing how to, I mean, we have so much fear of sitting with pain that it makes sense that we would also have fear of sitting with pleasure.
Yeah,
because,
that makes so much sense. Yes.
Because we don't know how to sit with pain. We as a species, and what I believe is that as the empaths, it's sort of like so much of the emotional intelligence, so much of the visceral, physical expression and sensory awareness that as human beings we've been compartmentalizing and denying that it's almost like there's this subset of our population that is feeling it for the rest of us. And, but it's like we as a species need to learn how to sit with what we feel, with sitting with the intensity, if we're going to. And so it really, I mean, it's just such a fascinating dance of like, you can't have pleasure with, to quote the Divinals in the 80s song, there's a fine line between pleasure and pain.
There is.
And I think there really is. And it's like, if we cannot allow ourselves to sit with the fullness of our human experience, it makes it really difficult.
It's a bit hard to be here. Yeah.
Michelle, I can't believe how fast this time has gone. I mean, you and I could talk forever and ever and ever. We often do. So before, I've got 2 questions I've got 3 questions for you. But the first question I've got for you is if there's anything else that like you'd be kicking yourself if you did not say this before we are done with this conversation, what would it be?
I think I'll just summarize that as I've let resistant vision go ahead and simmer. It's that what's really, really clear to me is that only trying to do things the way that trying to resolve problems the way that the problems are created is actually doing us damage and going to get us to the annihilation of life on Earth even more quickly, right? And it's time to slow down. It's time to connect deeply with ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our souls, and to actually have the courage to feel the entirety of the human experience.
Yes.
Right. Unenhanced with alcohol, unenhanced with other drugs, unenhanced with sugar, right? Like to really sit with it. I'm not saying I've done this perfectly, but that's what's required of us at this moment.
Well, and I think we're having to learn how to sit with it because, we're all, we've been breathing, we're the frogs in the boiling water. We've been breathing the poisonous air and listening to the toxic messages we've all been, regardless of there are those of us who can sort of are the outliers who can feel that there's something better, that there's something different, who have that glimmer, that spark of the resistant vision, who are feeling that call. But at the same time, we've all been colonized. At the same time, we've been breathing the air, we've been breathing the oxygen. And as empaths, we not only hear it and see it, we feel the influence of it. We feel the sway of it. And I've been talking a lot lately in the Empathic Mastery Academy and with people individually as well, and everywhere pretty much, about the idea of, as empaths, we also pick up on the desire body and the will body of other people, of not only other people, but of systems, of agendas. And that impacts us. Like as empaths, and this is where, coming back to what's mine, what's not mine. And as we were talking earlier in this conversation about being able to really offload, this is not my stuff. This is not my problem. This is not my, not my monkey, not my monkey, not my circus. Oh God, I can see them. They were like they were a comedy duo from, my Ollie, that's a fine mess you've gotten us into.
I've heard of, yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Like we are in quite a quandary right now, but slowing down and going for Comey Barrett.
I know, it just popped in my head. I'm like,
thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Not Coney Island. Not Coney Island. We wish that she was just an amusement ride. So the second question I've got for you, Michelle, is I always like to think of this season, I've been really playing with the idea of timelines and the fact that by broadcasting a podcast, we're sending the signal out into space and time. I believe that not only does it go forward into time, but it goes back into time. And that this recording, this data, this sound, this set of bandwidth is like a piece of a fabric of time that's folding over on itself. And that there's a point in the past where this is touching to, where we can access the struggling, too shy, overwhelmed, terrified young Michelle. And what I always love to do is imagine that we're going back there and you can look her in the eye. Maybe you want to put your hands on her chin and like hold her face in your hands and look her straight in the eye and say to her exactly what she needs to hear. So what is the message that wise, resistant vision Michelle wants to offer young, hasn't found the resistant vision yet, Michelle?
This was rough. This was a rough ride. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. And you will see the payoff of it in spades.
Can you give her a little bit of a seed of the resistant vision? What would you tell her so that she can start accessing it?
You know what's right.
You know what's right. Can I throw one in there?
Yeah.
You deserve to feel good.
Yes, you deserve.
You deserve pleasure.
You do.
It's okay to do what feels good.
Yeah. And actually, you have people in your life who they're not about pleasure. They really are about acting out the pain that they've had. You actually are profoundly connected to, you have the ability to heal. And from that, you're going to have a deep ability. You have it now, the deep ability to feel real pleasure. Take it where you can get it.
Take it where you can get it. Mm-hmm. And in a society that has so many boundaries and so many rules about where you're allowed to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and the layer upon layer of like colonization. Take it where you can get it. Okay, last question.
Mm-hmm.
How can people get in touch with you?
You can always go to resistantvision.com. And if you want, the date isn't changed yet. I have to set this up, but if you're a lawyer out there, you need to settle your nervous system because.
Well, and this may be, this podcast is actually being released on Cinco de Mayo.
Oh, well, never mind. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a link. I can't say it because it's a creative right. It's a lot, but
okay. So Michelle basically has a sort of some offerings and master classes and things like that. They will be included in the show notes for you. So
yes, tapping for lawyers. That's
for lawyers.
That's the thing. I would hope you would join me for that because you'll have no regrets.
No regrets. And I will just say, full disclosure, Michelle is one of my EFT certification candidates and students, and Michelle is freaking awesome. So I'm really proud of all the things that she is doing as an EFT practitioner. So please go check out Michelle, and particularly how to reclaim that pleasure and stop, get off the hamster wheel. Michelle, this conversation has just been so delicious, so rich. Like, oh my God. Thank you so much for showing up, for sharing your truth, for being part of this.
So exciting.
Oh, so good. Okay, guys. We would love to hear what you think about all of this. Leave comments. Reach out to Michelle. Tell her I sent you. And until next time, peace.
As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. And while you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your Empathic Safety Guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.